Aš moderuosiu. Šitą sesiją mano vardas Rimas. Esu Renkuosi mokytojų programos alumnas 6 kartos. Dirbau anglų kalbos mokytojų Troškūnų Kazimčiūros vidurinėje mokyklai. Ir mūsų tema sesijos individualizavimas ir diferencijavimas, kaip pamatyti kiekvieną vaiką. Tai man asmeniškai šitą temą įdomi, nes dirbdamas mokykloje gaudavau didelį džiaugsmą, kas labiausiai džiugindavo, tai būtent tas vaikų individualumas ir išskirtinumas. Ir kyla tada klausimas, man kildavo toks klausimas, kaip galėčiau atsiliepti tą jų išskirtinumą ir individualumą. Tai tikrai įdomi tema, aš manau, jums taip pat jinai intriguoja ir sesiją ves Abigail Huston, Teach for All vadovė partnerystei Baltijos šalims, ir Marijos Kanales, Teach for All vadovė partnerystei Ispanijoje. Tiesa, jeigu kiltų problemų dėl anglų kalbos, tai galite sakyti lietuviškai, yra ir vertėja, ir aš, ir mokytoja Valdonė, ir Sitskienė. Ta prasme, dėl to galim lietuviškai patai išleisti.
Thank you. And please don't feel hesitant to speak out if you don't know English just very well. Please just go ahead and ask questions and we'll make sure to get it translated, because this is definitely going to be more of like a working session. So it's not going to, I mean, we will be presenting some information, but we really want you to be able to engage in the material. So please don't hesitate to speak in whichever language you feel more comfortable in. So as Rima said, my name is Abigail Houston. I work for Teach for All, and basically in my role I support the 3 Baltic countries, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. And Teach for All is a network, as Rich mentioned in his speech, a network of 27 countries currently. We're all working towards the same mission, to work with high-need kids in high-need schools, whatever that may mean in the different countries' context. The teachers come and work for 2 years, and then they have this movement of alumni where they work in education and they really push a movement forward to make changes with whatever they see fit in their country's context. Before this role, I taught in what's called the Peace Corps in Moldova for 2 years. And then after that, I worked for another organization in the United States, working in very similar program. In similar contexts where teachers came in for 2 years and then moved forward with the education movement. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. I feel a little restricted because I'm behind this table. I would hello, my name is Maria. I do sort of the same role that Abby does for the Baltics, for Spain, and I live in Madrid. But I am an alumni of Teach for America, so I taught for 3 years actually. In South Louisiana, Baton Rouge, and then have worked in education ever since. I'm really passionate about teaching. I actually thought I would stay in the classroom, so I miss my kids a lot. So any opportunity I get to do a presentation or a training, or I just jump at it because it's really what motivates me. So I'm excited to be here, and thank you for having us. So the way we're going to spend our time is basically divided into 4 main components. One, we're going to, and we've already started to do this, just do a little introduction to what differentiation is. And basically, I think for the most part, everyone has some sort of prior knowledge when they came in, but there are also some misconceptions that we thought we would want to clear up and make sure that we address. So we'll do that. We're going to give you time to practice. So by no means are Abby and I sort of the experts on differentiated instruction. It's actually one of those things that is really difficult as a teacher. So when some of you were like, is it possible? Like, I remember feeling that when I was teaching. So the way you get better at differentiated instruction is trying it. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Then you try it again, you figure it out, and you just keep going. And so we're going to practice. We have some actual lesson plans that you guys will be differentiating for. We're going to talk also around this is it possible idea of how do you implement this, because it can be overwhelming. So we'll spend some time talking about implementation, what this could look like in your classroom, and then we'll have a brief reflection at the end. We We thought we'd do like a quick check for understanding and see where we are, especially since the article is in English and then the Lithuanian translation wasn't that good. And these are some common, I think, challenges or misconceptions that exist about differentiation. So we're going to do a quick true or false quiz, and we'll go one by one. And so if you think it's true, you're going to hold your thumbs up. If you think it's false, you're going to go down, okay? So number one, for differentiated instructions, it requires students to teach material that they have already mastered to others who have not yet mastered it. Why would it be false?
Yeah, so I mean, the main idea is like it requires students to teach them. It doesn't, I mean, it's not required that that's what they're doing for differentiated instruction.
And if I already know something and I'm teaching it to someone else, how is that making me improve?
Well, you don't, sorry if I can answer that.
Yeah.
You don't improve in the actual topic that you are teaching the others, but you improve in your whatever presentation skills.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
So that's right. So this strategy is an excellent strategy to have in your classroom. It's not necessarily differentiating, but it is helping your students maybe socialize, depending on who you pick to help the other student. Might help bridge some culture issues that you have in your classroom. It's an excellent strategy, but not necessarily going to push your student to the next level. So it's something that I think we should all be using in our classroom. I think it's not necessarily when we think about differentiation what it should be. The next one, assigning more math problems or more reading at the same level to high achieving students. You want to hit it? False. False. Yes. How would we change that to make a differentiation? What could we change in this statement? Like, why is it not?
Take out more and take out same level.
Yes. Yes. Sometimes it's almost like punishment for a student, right? It's like, I finished early, I know it, and now I get more work. Great. It's not necessarily motivating either, so that's right. It isn't a different lesson plan for each student each day. Is that true or false? It's a true statement. It's a true statement. And this is it should give us hope that this is a true statement, right? Differentiating and reaching all learners doesn't mean that you have to have 50 or 30 or however many lesson plans for each student every day. That would burn us all out and we would not be able to do it. So it's actually a good thing. All right, the next one. Implementing flexible grouping strategies that cluster students by achievement in a subject area, by interest, by learning style, by personal choice and or ability. That is true. That's what we should be doing. And the key word here is flexible. You don't want to keep your same students in the same group every time because they learn at different paces. So there might be someone that's in one group 1 week, and the next group, the next week he can move. There might be someone that needs more time, and they're going to need to stay in that level for a little bit. Okay, next one, modify assessments by modifying the rigor for content not related to the tested objective. That one might need translation because it's a little, even in English when I read it, I'm like, so basically that's saying, where is it? You would change your test by modifying the content, but still test the same objective. True. So you want to keep the objective or the standard that you're teaching is going to be the same for all your students. You're going to change the level to reach that objective for that. So everyone will still sort of test to that objective, but you might modify it depending on the rigor. Okay, next one, giving, which is kind of the opposite of this, of the last one, giving struggling students easier or less demanding worksheets or homework or things like that. So we have an example. You give your 4th grade or 4th class struggling students a 2nd or 3rd grade worksheet to complete because that's what they can do independently.
It depends what.
On
What
the
are we-
subject.
Depends on the subject.
If the subject is the same, but the advanced level in the second grade, so of course you can give a task from the previous year, but we should teach that course in that grade, theoretically. But practically, it could be a
But I'm
choice.
afraid it would be, or there's a great potential that it would be demotivating students. And if they are not able to achieve as high as they are expected, let's say in the fourth grade, if you kind of downgrade them, giving them the second or third year tasks, they might not continue believing in themselves, and they will not achieve perhaps even half of what they could achieve actually if they were encouraged. So in my opinion, it's totally false.
Okay. Anyone else want to weigh in on this one before we show the response? Any other thoughts? It is false. So I think you're right in that in your classroom, you need to bridge the gap. And that's what differentiation is. Like, it is about bridging the gap. I'm not going to teach a student how to multiply or divide if they don't know how to add, but I still need to get them there. So I need to figure out how to do that. And that's why it's tricky, because you don't want to just, oh, they know how to add or they know how to read this level, so I'm just going to keep them there. You have to figure out, how do I do that and at the same time teach them the higher level.
Aš tik lietuviškai, kad aš galvoju, kad čia yra kokiam laikui yra tas dalykas, nes jeigu išlyginti reikia, tu demotyvuosi tą žmogų, jeigu tu jam duosi 4 lygio, jis dar 2 nemoka, tu sudarai jam pakopą žingsnių, kaip jis užliptų į viršų. Tai kaip tik yra ta, gali demotyvuoti, jeigu jis dar nepasiruošęs užeiti tą 4 aukštą. Tai 2, 3 ir jis per greitesnį laiką pasieks tą 4 lygį. Tai aš manau, kad...
Yeah, and I think that's right. And so I think the idea behind this too is thinking in absolute terms, right? So like, oh, this student, so not basically the opposite of the theme, right? Not having high expectations. So, oh, this student is in 2nd grade level, I'm just going to teach 2nd grade level to this student. Instead of thinking what you said, which is, okay, this week or for this amount of time, we're going to do this to help you build up to get to the 4th grade. And I think that's when we put this in here, it was like, it's a little tricky, because I think in practice we do a little bit of this, but it's never the goal. It's never sort of the end point.
We have story from India.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So they took baby steps but at the end,
Yes.
they knew how to speak English, or whatever that
Achieved 4 years.
achieved
And I
4
think
years.
the other big thing to think about is if you only teach somebody who's in the 4th grade, 2nd grade level, they will stay behind for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
Because they won't ever be able to catch up. So that's the hard thing, is when you have students in your classroom, you're differentiating because there are students that are behind, and that's not fair. They're not able to get where they need to get in life or where they want to be in life. And that's why differentiation is so important, because we have to ensure that maybe this child didn't learn last year, we need to get them to grade level this year, in 1 year, when really, they're behind 3 years.
Okay, teaching different objectives to different groups of students. Does anybody want to share anything before we go? Because there's some people went like this right away, and then some people went like this right away. Anybody want to share out? Okay. All right. So this one is false, and here's why. And again, it's similar to the one above, where it's just thinking longer term. When you're planning your lesson, or your unit, or whatever amount of time you're planning, you want all your students to reach that level. What you're going to change is not the objective, but how they get to that objective. Do they need to learn it differently? Do I need to modify the content? Maybe they are not at the reading level, but this objective is not about reading. So I'm going to have them make something because they're good with their hands. I'm going to have them act it out because they like theatrics and they want to do that. And they can show me that they learned this objective in different ways. So you don't necessarily change the objective. You change the process, the content, or the product of how you're reaching that objective. Similar to the other ones, it's tricky. There's some areas that are gray because if you have different groups, The groups might be working in different objectives because of their levels, but in that group, everyone's going toward that one bigger goal. Okay, providing filler activities for students who finish early. They're aligned to specific learning goals. So should I explain that a little?
So these are basically, so whatever the goals are of the class, if students get done early, you give them more work.
Teaching most lessons as whole class and only using small groups for reteaching. It is false. So in a differentiated classroom, you'll usually have a number of groups. Doesn't mean you won't ever have whole class. Of course, you're going to have some whole class lessons, but it is based a lot on grouping your students in different ways. Sometimes you might group them by level, sometimes by interest. It just sort of depends on the lesson and all that. Did you want to add? Yes.
Vėl, aš tik į prieš paskutinį noriu sugrįžti, kad ta užduotis gali duoti ir motyvuoja, jeigu, pavyzdžiui, tai yra matematika pas mane ir tai yra loginė užduotis, tai yra kažkokie įdomus kryžiažodžiai arba įdomus kažkokia užduotis, tokias, kurios nori vaikai labai. Ir jie tada greičiau mokosi, kad sulauktų tos užduoties papildomos, kad jie galėtų ją padaryti. Tai irgi čia, kas tai bus ir koks yra tikslas, tai aš manau, kad tai gali būti kaip tik tas stiprinantis dalykas.
Are you talking about this one? Yes. And the difference is that exactly what you said is what you should do. It could be a logic, something that's critical thinking, or something by interest.
Interest comes in.
And that's why I thought filler might be really like American, but filler is like.
The same example is with a girl who likes writing essays, and she says, "Teacher, give me more creative writing each time," and I think it's quite good.
Yeah. And I think that's it. So I think the filler thing is what I was afraid you wouldn't understand. The filler for us means just more, just like if we're working on division, you're just gonna get more division. A worksheet, that's more. But if it's like a logic, it's a tangram or that's different. You're hitting either an interest, like you said, they like to write essays, and that's not more work for them. That's something they enjoy. Great. Okay. So so this is just the basic foundation again of what was in the article. Some basic principles. So 3 ways to differentiate. You can modify the content, the way or the process in which students access that content, or the end product. And all of these can vary in the process and product more so, but can vary whether their readiness means their achievement level, whether they're interested in it, or their learning profile. How do they learn? Do they learn are they kinesthetic? Do they need to move? Are they auditory? Do they need to hear you say it? Are they visual? Just how do you do that? And so just a couple of things that we've tried to model how successful it was. But for example, if we knew that we were coming to a session where the language might be an issue. So we tried our best to have things that were simple in language we'd use Google Translate, which wasn't great, but but trying to think of ways where we can differentiate for the group of folks that we had, but everybody's still doing the same content, but we try to change the way you understood it. Maybe you read it in English because that was easier, or maybe in Lithuanian, but everybody read the same thing. And so that's just one way, the way to think about it. So this is just the basic principles. Any questions about this?
I have a question about the content part.
Yes.
Previously, we had a point that 2nd, 3rd grade, and 4th grade, so that we have to set one goal for all. So I understand that is content, the course.
Yeah.
For us, and here is content, and we can differentiate that.
Differentiate.
So my question is, where is the line?
Yeah. Sorry. Rely on some other stuff here. So I think the idea here is like figuring out where your students are for that content. So at the end of the year, your students need to know X, Y, and Z, right? And for this unit, instead, the content you might differentiate is one person might already know X, maybe you don't have them go through that. Maybe you have them start at a different level. Or in the opposite, which is probably more common to us, is they don't know what they need in order to get to X, Y, and Z. So you might modify the content to help them get there. Does that make sense? So the goal is still the same, but the content needs to change for them to access it, to be able to get to that. Does this seem pretty aligned with what you all have encountered and have been working towards as well? Yes?
Or is there a different way, just because we're learning too, what the context, what it means in Lithuania and what the context is here, is there another way that you all think about what differentiation is and how to do differentiation in your classrooms or in your schools?
I have second question.
Yeah.
I don't know, is it language for me? What is product means?
Product? Yeah, that's a great question. So it's just at the end of your lesson how your students are going to, or unit, depending, how your students are going to show you that they learned the objective. So maybe
Like
it's
the results.
Yeah, just the end product. I think the easiest sort of end product for all teachers is some type of test or a quick quiz that they do before they leave the class. But when you're thinking about differentiation, think about whether that student can demonstrate what they've learned in a different way, in a better way. So one example that I used to use in my classroom is I had a lot of students who just didn't know how to read and therefore write really well. But for subjects like social studies, and I taught small kids like second grade, for social studies or for math sometimes or science, where I wasn't testing whether they could read or not, because that's reading and writing. But for these other things, they could draw me the answer, or I also had bought these like mini tape recorders, and they can sit in, like I had a little area where they could go sit and hit record and tell me their answer, so later in the day I could check it whenever I had time. So it was just different ways that I was still finding out, did they learn? But if I asked them, write me 2 sentences about this, I wouldn't get an answer. But they actually learned it. Or maybe they didn't, but I wouldn't know because they would just leave it blank. So that's sort of the idea here. How can you ensure that you are giving them the opportunity to demonstrate whether they learned it? And the end product just needs to match the objective. And they could be in different ways.
So before we said that you don't sort of create new lesson plans, well, separate lesson plans for for each kind of each student. But I mean, you don't have to make basically different activities for each group. It's still I mean, I don't want to kind of say extra work, but I mean it is. It's extra work.
Yes, it's not less work by any means, but I think, and hopefully we'll get to this at some point if we're doing it on time. If you can think of ways, and this is hopefully we'll get to this will be some of the new ideas that you can walk away with. If you can establish systems, procedures, processes in your class, or in your school, or your context, that are just sort of rituals, then you kind of can go to them. So like that listening and recording center that I had in my room, I used it like all the time for lots of different reasons. For reading, they could listen to the book while they read. For testing, like just different ideas. And so if you can figure out what for your subject area, your grade and all that stuff makes sense, you can establish some things that once you do them, hopefully it won't be like every day creating something new or every week thinking of something new. It's just a matter of coming up with what those will be and what will work for you in your context.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and move through. So I'm going to go quickly through the next couple of slides. We just wanted to touch upon this idea of fair is not necessarily equal, and give you a little bit of an analogy. Just like, for example, we want all of our students to achieve their full potential, and that doesn't mean that giving them the same thing is going to allow them to do that. Just like a doctor wouldn't give the same medicine to every sick person. So to give you like another kind of analogy is the candy analogy. So imagine that you stick a piece of candy up on the wall in your classroom, and you ask your class, who wants the candy? Everyone's probably going to raise their hand and say, yes, I want the candy. So you pick the shortest and the tallest child to come up and try and get the candy. So which child is going to be the one that's actually able to attain it? The tallest one. Right. So the goal is the same. They both need to get the candy. Just because one child is taller doesn't mean that they should have a better outcome in life, that they're the only ones that can achieve their full potential. So what do we do to make sure that the smallest child is able to access the candy? Give them a chair to stand on. So again, like, this is the idea. You're not changing the goal. You're not changing what the child is trying to learn and achieve. You're changing the way in which they're able to achieve it. And so now the little child can get the candy. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move into group work because we really want to make sure that we have a chance to work with some lesson plans.
So do you want to pass them out? So again, the idea behind differentiation and just getting good at it, especially for the teachers that are here that are still in the classroom, it just takes practice and it does take some thinking and some work. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you a lesson plan. It is in English, but it's hopefully easy enough to understand. We try to be conscious of that. We're going to ask you to work in groups, read through it, and each group is going to also get a student profile. So you're going to have a student in your class that you're going to take this lesson and adapt it. And so we're going to have one group that's going to adapt same lesson for content, one for product, and one for process. So if the group on this end, if you will modify based on content, this middle group based on process, and this group here on product. Okay? So I'm gonna, I just randomly, I think.
Yeah.
Oh wait, sorry, were we gonna have them decide?
Oh, yes.
Yes, sorry, we changed our product. Sorry. This is even more fun though. This is more fun, I promise. Okay, so you're gonna still decide, you're gonna work on one of these, but you're gonna decide based on what you know about your student. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you're going to read the lesson plan, you're going to read the profile, and then together you're going to say, okay, what does this student need? Does this student need me to modify the content to get it? Does this student need me to modify the process? Or does this student need to modify the product? And as a team, you're going to decide and then talk about how you would do it. So you're going to, after 15 minutes or so, present out to the group how you would change it, how you would change that lesson plan for your student.
Gali būti dėl rezultatų galima. Būtent ar viešai, ar individualiai. Gal jie gėda, nemoka, gal bijo, kad jau šaipysis, tai gali būti, kad ir vertinimo būdas gali būti labiau individualus. Bent jau turėjus, tai tikrai ne.
Nes jeigu į procesą jį įstatys ir kažkaip tai... Bet vis tiek įtraukti ją reikia, jeigu nėra atsiribojusi jau, tai ją reikia įtraukti. Ir jeigu jie tik siūlosi atsiskaityti kitokį raštą, tai į klasę neįš, reikia galvoti apie skaitą.
Jeigu mes kalbam apie procesą, tai reikia persiskaityti turbūt šitą
Jo, tada kaip tą konkrečiai padaryti?
Yra drąsi.
Ji drąsiai aktyviai dalyvauja, bet kartu ji bijo, kad netai bus įvertinta.
O kaip ten apie tą kalbėjimą, kad jinai kalbėjimai geriau tik rašyti, skaityti kažką. Skaityti. Ai, mėgsta skaityti.
Taip. 3 lygiais atsilieka skaitymas.
Skaitymas problema.
O esminis klausimas, dabar mes turime ką padaryti?
Mes turime įsirinkti.
Neturim paruošti planą?
Mes turim procesą, kaip mes ją įtraukime.
Mes pasirinkti galim. Iš tų 3. Pasirinkti vieną iš tų 3.
Tai ką mes produktų darom? Ar
Reikia atsižvelgti visus tos dalykus, panalizuojame. Imsim turinį, jeigu imsim turinį.
Čia labai keistas. Jeigu mokinys blogai skaito,
Yra daug vaikų, yra.
Bet žiūrėkit, bet jinai gali internete medžiagos ieškoti savotiškai, sakykime, aš taip įsivaizduoju, kad jeigu yra galimybė rinkti temą apie to Izraelio kažkokio, va šitas valstybės susitarimas, kiek aš peržiūrėjau, čia yra pagrindinė problema, yra kaip atsirado, jis susikūrė šitą Izraelio valstybę ir kaip čia kyla. Maždaug žinote, čia jungtinė tautų, kokias čia vaidino, čia ne tik svarbu, kas ten buvo. Esmė, kad jinai, kas turėjo, va čia holokaustą, aš taip suprantu, kad ta tema. Kodėl Palestinos, kodėl tos žemės buvo atiduotos.
Tai dabar jos problema bus kur? Kad jis sunkiai skaito, ne? Reiškia daugiau laiko trumpų tekstų.
Taip.
Ir daugiau laiko.
Ir daugiau reikia aktyvintis tai tas procesas, nes jinai aktyvintis jaučiasi kaip žuvis toje veikloje, reiškia, diskusijose.
Bet jie gali ieškoti, pavyzdžiui, internete. Jei tai gali būti įdomu tą daryti.
Tai dabar ką mes rašom, reikia rašyti kažką, ką mes turim, tai reiškia mūsų kokius yra priemonės.
Ką mes iš tų trijų pasirenkam? Procesą ar turinį?
Ar procesą, gal procesą?
Procesas, nes negeriausia tame.
Geriausia procesą, bet atvedate to vis tiek procese galvoti apie kokį rezultatą pasieks. Ar vieną projektą rašys, ką jinai turi pasiekti. Jo, kaip ir projektuota.
Ji turi išmokti skaityti ir nebijoti skaityti.
Tai gal tada rašyti tais punktais? Ką mes turim kokį procesą?
Ką mes turim padaryti? Jie turinį žino, nedaugmaž procesą jie pakankamai aktyviai yra, bet jie problema, kai nemoka skaityti ir jie ten tema.
Pasakoju ir dalinuosi tą visą pamokos temą, jisai nesiklauso. Jeigu kur čia yra, jeigu mokiniai triukšmauja aplinkui, tai jis yra tas, kuris sukelia tą triukšmą. Tai akivaizdu, kad jeigu jam vien mokytojas perteikia informaciją, tai jam ta informacija neteina į galvą ir jisai turbūt, kadangi jisai klasiai nesistengdamas vis tiek pasirodo gerai, tai vadinasi jisai mokosi arba pats kažkokiais kitokiais būdais, arba jisai tą žino. Tai šiaip ar taip turbūt reikia, aš manau, patį procesą keisti, padarant kitokį, kuris sudomintų patį tą vaiką. Bet dabar aš nesu tikra, ar čia aš teisingai visų pirma mąstau ir visų antra, ar mes turime vardinti metodus, kaip tą procesą pakeisti ir kaip įsivaizduojam, kad jį galima išmokyti. Neišmokyti, bet privesti prie to, kad jisai gerai pasirodytų tame dalyve.
Daugiau to savarankiško gal darbo duoti ir pačios medžiagos analizės.
Nes čia yra klasės planas, tai pamokos planas ar pamokų, tarkim, planas.
Bet ta prasme proceso nėra, neaišku, kaip jis vyksta.
Tai mes jį turbūt ir turim sukūrti procesą. Jo, čia yra tik tai, kad čia yra tik tai teorinė medžiaga, ne, ką jūs taip pateikia. Testo klausimai dar kažkokie, žiūrėkite. Kaip tai suprasti?
Bet tai aš manau, čia užduotis. Aš manau, kad by default yra, jeigu nėra jokio parodyta kažkokio tai specialios metodikos, jeigu nėra nurodytos, tai tikriausiai, kad, tai tiksliau, jeigu ta speciali metodika nenurodyta, tai kaip ir yra toks supratimas, kad pats mokytojas atsistoja ir paaiškina vaikams, ne?
Planas yra tas dalykas, kad mokytojas yra.
Pats sukūrė tą planą.
Bet jis ir parašo kaip? Ar
kokius metodus naudoja? Kokie turinio dalį, kokiais metodais jis perteikia?
Nuotraukos. Dabar žemėlapis čia gali būti.
Duodu pavyzdį, taip?
Bet čia iš mokytojo pusės, bet iš ką vaikas daro. Mokytojas, kad ne mokytojo veikla planuoja, bet mokytoja. Ką jie daro su to medžiaga? Duoda pasirinkti. Saviausia, kad ne mokytojas. Jis tik turi pagalvoti, kad bus daug pasirinkti medžiagos.
Individualizuota užduotis su daug paveikslybių, mažai tekstų.
Antras dalykas, man atrodo, labai svarbu, jeigu jisai duos, kad ta mergaitė, kad jinai komunikuoja, gali būti, kad prie jos yra kiti mokiniai, kad susiskirstimas, grupelį, kad jie turi pagal tą medžiagą paruošti kažkokį tai pristatymą. Kad ta mergaitė dalyvautų diskusiją, nes jis aktyviai užduoda klausimus.
Suteikti galimybę dalyvauti diskusijoje.
Tai dabar, ką tos mums duoda vaizdinės medžiagos?
Mokytojas sąrašas, tai pavyzdžiui, jeigu yra žemėlapis arba kokios valstybės išdalina ir sako, jūs dabar grupėje turite...
Čia grupiniam darbui.
Taip, grupiniam darbui.
Jūs taip įsivaizduoju.
Aš taip įsivaizduoju, kad jeigu jisai darė, jeigu jis pats pasakos ir vaikai tik klauso, nieko nebus su ta vaizdinė medžiaga. Bet jis savotiškai, sakykime, kad jie įsitraukia, pavyzdžiui, galim sudėlioti, koks tai kelias buvo tų eigoje. Jeigu čia kalbam apie šitos visus Versalių ir taip toliau, kas buvo tos sutartis? Kas tai ko galėjo būti?
Konkrečia mergaitė, čia reikia, nes jinai problemų su kalbėjimo bijo. Girdėjau.
Aš noriu pasakyti, kad gal mes galėtumėm tada, sakykime, tas grupės irgi skirstyti skirtingai. Toj grupiai, kur ta mergaitė yra, iš tikrųjų duoda daugiau vaizdinių priemonių diskusijai, kitai grupiai galima duoti tekstą, diskutuoti kažkokį istoriją, trečiai ten dar kažką. Ir, sakykime, būtent ta mergaitė toj grupiai galėtų būti, kur yra tos vaizdinės priemonės ir taip pat jinai dalyvauja diskusijoje, bet jai nereikia skaityti. Aš nežinau, galim tai daryti.
Kodėl įsivaizduojam, kad turi dirbti grupiai, o jeigu jie, viena dirba?
Bet jinai
klausyti reiktų. Gali taip, bet jeigu, tarkim, klasėje darbas vyksta.
Aš manau, kad grupiai darbas.
Ar mes klasėje, ar ne klasėje?
Mes klasėje diferencijuojam darbą.
Nes jeigu jinai tipo trečią minutę uždžiamai lygiai skaito ir mes jai stengiamės neduoti skaityti, tai kada jinai išmoks skaityti?
Bet jinai prie tos vaizdinės medžiagos gali būti nedidelė daug teksto, kur jin paskaito. Tai sakykime, apie tą sutartį, apie tą vietovę, žemėlapį kažkokią.
Mes neleidžiam kartelę.
Ne, tai jie duoda paskaityti.
Sustiprinti ją toj vietoje arba jai sudaryti komfortą, bet kažkokią psichologinį, kad jie pajaustų to savo kartu.
Ir kad ir suprastų turinį pamokos irgi.
Galim tokią hipotezę ir kelti, kad iš tikrųjų, kad galbūt suras bent vieną, kad jie bent poroj būtų. Ir būtent galbūt poroj, nes jau 3 ar 3 gali tylėti. O poroj tai bus, privalės kalbėtis būsinai. Ir kartu parinkti tokį, kuris gal simpatizuoja netgi, kas žino, interesai, diferencijavimą pagal interesus.
Ta visą klasę, taip šiek tiek jie gali tos klausimus duoti ir kitiems vaikams poros. Tik kad tos poros irgi pagalvoti, kaip jie sudaryti, kad tų porų tempas darbo nesiskirtų, pagalvoti apskritai, kaip tą darbo poros pagalvoti, kad, sakysim, su labai stipriu teigiamu nusiteikusiu mokymu tą vaiką. O kitus, dėl tos kalbos, nes jos dėl kalbos striks aiškinsis. O kitus irgi taip.
Bet jeigu yra pamokos tikslas į šitą kontestą susižinoti būtent tą istoriją ir tam tikrus klausimus, tai nevertinti jos kalbinių įgūdžių, o irgi tada apie produktą, kaip jinai atsiskaitys, arba kaip mes sužinosim, kad jinai išmoko, tai jai pateikti kažkokiu kitų būdu, ne kalbiniu, bet kaip...
Tai savai aišku, kad kažkokiu kitų mes apie procesą, tai tavo, o idėja apie produktą.
Kaip jie tos klausimus mergaitai pateikti, kaip jie atsakyti, tai jeigu kiti žodžiu atsakinėja arba raštu, o jinai to
čia irgi
negeba.
turbūt priklausys nuo laiko, jai reikės užaugti. Pradžio gali būti netgi, kad būtent jau sporininkas atsakinėja, kad jie du kartu įsprendė, kad jai viešai dar nereikia kalbėti. O ilgainiui galbūt.
O šiaip mokymus bendradarbiausiai, tai jos taip yra, tu pirmiausia paklausti vaiką, kai jau tik aš jisai nepatirs ten tokio didžiulio streso, pasakyti, jeigu klasėje tokias taisyklės, kad galima pildyti. Tai žodžiu, labai jeigu tai natūrali klasėje, natūrali rutina, tai tiesiog truputėlį galės daugiau pasakyti. Nes jeigu sako,
Kad leistų jie kažką pasakyti, nesudėtingo, tarkim, susitartų, ką jį pasakys atsakymuose, o kas sudėtingiau, jau gal papildys arba jie...
Šideriu mes jau per daug laiko turėjom, mes galvojom labai subtiliai. Principinis sprendimas, kad ją susodint poroj dirbti. Viskas.
Ir reikia su labai stipriu vaiku.
O po to jau detalės prasideda, mes aplinkų detalės.
Jeigu žodžiu labai pozityvių, suprantančių, su norinčių padėti.
Bet už tai aš ir galvoju, kad jam, bet tai tas iššūkis jam ir turi būti.
O gal žinot, kaip yra, čia nėra teisingo atsakymo, ir mes negalim galbūt nuspręsti, kad mes imam ir pakeičiam procesą. Mes galim pakeisti procesą, padarydami jį, tarkim, dėmesio centre, arba ten sukurdami keletą pamokų, kurios būtų skirtingos stiliaus, tame, kad geriau, tarkim, simulacija, kokie nors debatai ir ten kokią nors šiaip, vat, nu, irgi kažkokios, tai tarkim, kalbos parašymas gal pasiruošiant, nebūtinai ne tas galutinis rezultatas, bet kad tu suteiktum jam galimybę rašyti. Arba netgi galim keisti tą galutinį testą.
Tiek galutinį testą keisti, tiek ir patį procesą, kad jis visiškai individualiai pradėtų daryti. Ir tarkim, jo rolė yra čerčilis, palestinietis, bet nėra izraelitas būsimo. Arba žydų tautos atstovai ir tarkim jam duodant atskirą medžiagą.
Bet tai būtų visai toks nubrėžiama riba tarp jo ir tarp kitų mokinių, tas irgi gal nelabai gerai, aš galvoju pačioj, nu, nes tada jis išmoktų apie tos, tarkim, Izraelio požiūrį, izraelitus tuos, ar ten pažvelgtų į visą tą situaciją pro jų prizmę, o kiti vaikai to nematytų. Nu, tai mes iškart brėžiam, taip, nu, kažkiek tai čia gaunasi tos diferenciacijos, bet kažkiek tai gaunasi galbūt ir vieno mokinio sureikšminimas, o kitų nuvertinimas tuo pačiu metu. Ar ne? Nu, aš po to bijau, kad nebūtų taip, kad jeigu tu vienam duosi visiškai skirtingas užduotis ir paskui net visiškai skirtingą testą, tai nu jisai praktiškai kaip ir mokosi visai kitoj klasiai. Nesvarbu, kad apie tą pačią temą, tai va aš nežinau, ar čia gerai.
Aš tai galvoju, žinau, kad pirmiausia, mums reikia pagalvoti apie tai, kaip mes galim tą jo poreikį sakyti. Koks yra, dabar apibrėžkim, koks yra jo poreikiai. Iš esmės, jo poreikiai kokie. Čia rašo apie rašymą. Taip, tai vat aš galvoju, jam tai patinka, jeigu aš teisingai suprantu, taip? Ar ne? Jam patinka, tai reiškia, mes turim pirmiausiai diferencijuodami ir individualizuodami jį veš, taip liaudiškai tariant, tada, kai bus jam įdomu, kai mes atliepsim jo poreikį. Tai vat man ir atrodo, kad mes turėtumėm atliepti tą jo poreikį rašyti. Jam jis patinka. Nesvarbu, kokią medžiagą, bet svarbu yra tai, kad jam pats, nu, šitas dalykas patinka. Tai va, aš taip galvoju, kad to jam reikia. To jam reikia, jis gali kažką individualiai studijuotis tą medžiagą. Bet tas pats produktas ir procesas, produktas turi būti jam įdomus ir tada jis eis į kitus.
So I will say one of the hardest things so far has been seeing you guys be hard at work in groups and not being able to like listen in and know what you're talking about and help answer some questions. I think you guys had some questions and things. That was definitely the hardest part because the teacher in me wants to be like moving around and talking to everybody. But I trust that you guys had some really good conversations and maybe even some challenges and difference of opinions on what we should do and why and how. So a couple of points before we go around and ask you guys to share out. So one is, some of this stuff, there's no right or wrong necessarily answers. It's sort of gray. It's like, as a teacher, once you know your students and your class, you make a call, you decide. Like, I think that for Johnny, like, this is what's gonna help him improve and I'm gonna do it this way. And it goes back to the point of like, let's try it, let's see, yay, this worked, or no, didn't, what else can I do? So it's okay if some people thought like, this person needs process change, this person needs product change. I think there's some gray area that we can work in. Another sort of point that I wanna share out with you is for this exercise, we gave you one student, just because it was easier for us to do an activity in an hour and all that. In reality, you're not going to modify your lesson for each student for each person in your class every day. But you do need to know your students, and that's a big component of it. And so you wouldn't do it for each student, you would do it for groups of students. Once you know your students, you might know, you'll know there's a group that's really low in this, or really high in this, or really likes essay writing, or really enjoys this whatever it is. And once you get to know them, you'll have that information to be able to differentiate a bit better and implement things that will help you. So let's go around and I'm going to ask that you share out actually two things. So share out, well actually I guess more than two things, but share out how you would change, like what is one thing that you would change?
Your profile.
Yes, based on your profile. So you're going to tell us a little bit about your student, and then what you would change and why. So you're going to share out what you would change based on your student, like why. And then if there was some challenge in your group, we'd love to hear what that challenge was, just so that the rest of us can engage in that.
He sits in the back of the class and does not participate much in class. He is very popular with other students. In fact, at times when the class is loud or rowdy, he is often the one leading. The quality of his writing and essays is one of the best in the class. It seems as if Vygantas does not put a lot of effort in his work, but he still achieves good grades. And finally, last week, you overheard a conversation that he had with another student where he said that it would be cool to be a writer. So.
Rašytojų norėtų būti. Jėga būti rašytojų.
Not school, but cool. Sorry.
No, thank you.
This is my professor, I should explain.
Thought we should change probably the product.
And the process.
And the process as well, really, basically. But the how was a bit more difficult. The what was fine, but the how.
So basically, we were discussing, or firstly, the first decision was to change process, then to change product, then to change process, then we had a problem understanding or finding out what is the common process, or that was constructed for all, and that could be changed. But after all, we understand the basic thing that we have to give something that it is connected with writing.
Okay.
Then we had several problems about if we will give him kind of different role, if we will change a process for him, so won't he become some kind of distinctive person in the class? That might be also a problem. So yeah, the last ideas were, or he could write an article from what was happening in the United Nations at the time, because other students will have to prepare some kind of draft speech by Winston Churchill, another one, or both should, or it's also unclear. So he will be kind of in the role of journalist to write a overall article, or as it was the last suggestion, so he should imagine himself as a Churchill today and to write his the same thing about the creation of Israel, but in today's context.
I think also maybe something to add, we all agreed that it's not a good idea to carry on as we carried on before and to ignore Vygantas, because if we do ignore him, then it's likely that the rest of the class will not learn or achieve anything either. So we discussed about giving him more attention maybe and making him kind of in the center of the class, but we did not want to make it too obvious to everybody else. Again, not to show that we are giving our full attention to him only, and not to his peers. So, I think we might need to have a little bit more time to prepare.
We'll try to be quite brief. That is, the problem is with Dagna, a 14-year-old girl, receives average grades, likes to read but is 3 grade levels behind, occasionally gets in trouble for talking and being disrespectful. And you have noticed that Dagna actively participates in class discussions, but does not turn in written assignments. Now, what we have decided is that we would split most probably the class into 3 groups, and would change content and process as long as they sort of overlap. And most probably we would prepare and use more visual aids, such as diagrams, maps with minimal text beside to read, and would ask her to draw conclusions, presenting the feedback on behalf of the group, saying not I, me, but we think, or both do. Now sure, we would encourage her self-esteem and self-confidence by giving her, let's say, some independent practice, pretending her being a Palestinian teenager and whatever, just to develop her speaking habits and just sort of presentation. Now, and one more thing, perhaps it would greatly depend on the teacher's encouragement, on the teacher's part and personal charisma while creating the atmosphere of the class.
Which goes for actually for both students. It's tricky because we're talking about academic content and rigor, but so much is in the culture of your classroom and how you as a teacher sort of handle the dynamics of everything going on. So yes, very, very true.
That is putting everything in a nutshell.
Yes. Great, thank you. Is this group going to share out?
So we have Alexandra, she is 14 years old, and she 1 year ago just moved to Lithuania, speaks only Russian, still have difficulties to learn Lithuanian, and we noticed that step by step she is separate her from the rest of the class, and never asks question at the time, always after the class when she's more comfortable. So we as group decided that we have to differentiate the process, because there is no problem written about her understanding, her level. It's communication problem, and we decided that we can make the pairs to learn the subject, so that she can how to say,
work with
another student that understands Russian. They together in pair can discuss, and she would a little bit practice to speak in Lithuanian, or just communicate more without any big stress for her. Just ask her in front of all the class.
Yeah.
So the process in class would be in pairs. That's the key thing we decided together, I think.
Anything else?
And later maybe we could add those pairs to some groups, so to reach another level.
Slowly,
yeah,
integrating. Great. Well, thank you for participating. I know sometimes these activities are so segmented, you only have one student, and the reality is you probably have a lot more than one student, and you're going to be doing it a little bit differently. But just to give you an idea that even with one lesson plan, if you really know your students, and that's the key, you can modify some things here and there. And a lot of what I heard actually probably wouldn't even take you that much longer. Like, it's just a different way of thinking about this. So we had an interesting discussion while you guys were working, was just asking questions around, okay, well, if I, do I do this for each student? How does this work? And so the idea of differentiation is you sort of know your class, you figure out what trends are in your class, you group them, and you can group them in so many different ways, in levels and interests and all that. It'll change by subject area, by unit within a subject area. But you do that. You may also, though, still have someone who's just an exception for whatever reason. Really low, really high, doesn't know the language at all, just whatever it is. And for that particular student, maybe some of the things you're already doing in differentiation might not work, and that's where individualization sort of comes in. So you might be doing a lot of things that will reach 98% of your students, but for that 2%, or in some classes 5%, or whatever it is, you may need to do something very different or specific for that student. And so that's when we think about differentiating and individualizing, that's sort of the difference. So most of the time you'll do differentiation in your class, and for those that need it, you may need to do very specific things just for them, especially for those, and I don't remember who mentioned, but those that have special needs, or different disabilities or things like that. I had a student that just had really severe ADHD and couldn't sit in his, and so he had a little carpet at the end of the classroom that he could just go nuts in, and it was one little square and he could do it. And the kids knew that was okay for him, not for anybody else, but just that was something very specific for him that he would do different times during the day. Again, thinking about what his needs are. everybody else doesn't have that specific thing. So it was individual. But for most of the things, it stayed the same. So it's just thinking about the difference of those two. Okay, so we're gonna, now we've sort of talked about theory and what this could look like, and we've done some work, but we want you to really think, and we put classes here, but really, because you all work in different environments, just think about this in a way that would help you and applies to what you do, or how you work with teachers, or how, whatever is gonna work. But we'd like you to think about specifically your role, and how you work with folks or how you work with students, and what kinds of groups of learners do you have. So think about your class, think about your experience, and then think about what they might need to get to your learning objectives, right? And once you sort of think about, I have this group of students, maybe it is that they don't know the language, okay? They're language learners. Great. What do they need? I need the process because that's what it is. Great. And then the third one is, so what am I going to do in my classroom tomorrow, in my job next week, or whatever, that's going to help me learn that? And we specifically put system, processes, and procedures because right now we don't want you to think about like lesson plan because that's specific and going to be different for everyone. But what are things that I could do in general that would help me? So for my example, if I have a large group of students that don't know the language, I might decide, like your group, that just in general, I will have picture clues for a lot of the things that I do. So that's just going to be something that I don't have to think about anymore. I'm just going to always have some picture that I'm going to show when I give directions or when I am doing my lesson plans. It's just going to be a decision I make because I know my students are going to benefit from that. So think a little bit bigger than lesson planning. How can you make an environment? How can you arrange your materials? What structures can you put in place to help the different groups that you have in your classroom or that you encounter with? We're going to give you some time to sort of do this.
Just a limited amount of time because we're almost up. So we'll give you about just like 2-3 minutes. So just think through this, and then we'd love to hear just some of your thoughts too, so everyone can share out what they're thinking and get some ideas as well.
I think I'm on the right track because I have many new students this year, and I identify the problem that some of them lack vocabulary, some of them grammar structures, basic grammar structures. So I established a rule. I work in cooperative groups that are mixed ability, and I established such a corner. Well, what to do when you have nothing to do? When they finish some work, so they go. The ones that need vocabulary practice, they have some materials for practicing, for doing some crosswords, doing other things, and with answer keys. So, and others have some special cards with grammar structures, one side Lithuanian, the other side English, so they go through and just check themselves, not interfering with others. So I now understood that perhaps intuitively I'm doing the third. The third. So, thank you.
Tas, po viso to, ką šiandien girdėjau, tai visada yra ta riba, kaip nepaslysti ant to, kad duodi žemesnio lygmens užduotis ir kad stebėti pažangą ir auginti iki to ir po to, kad jis tikrai pasiektų tą lygmenį. Tai yra, kad neužsižaisti su to žemesniu lygmeniu. Tai yra, kad tu jį pastovi auginti ir pažangą daryti. Kad, kai matai, kad jis yra žemesnio lygmens, bet kad jisai gali pasiekti ir aukštesni tie lūkesčiai, kad išliktų. Tai, nes tai yra lengvai nusileisti, bet aš ne, kad tu pastovi jį skatintum ir kad jis darytų pažangą. Tai tas kažkaip kaip save taip pagauti, kad tu dar nesėdi tam lygmenio ir padėti vaikui.
And that's, exactly what we're talking about, keeping the high expectations for all children. So, yeah.
Anybody else want to share? Yes.
So maybe just on the last part, processes, how maybe I am implementing this idea of differentiation. So, for example, during some specific when we are learning some specific topics from history, and the whole learning process is based on the group work, and sometimes the groups are arranged by the level. So basically, during this time, in such a way that everyone is working as they can. They are using such a sources which they can absorb, comprehend, and so on. And basically, the evaluation or the process of collaboration is more important than the product or output, what they are, the production, what they make. So in such a way.
So the process, the accessing the content meets their needs, and at the end it's sort of the same, but what's important is how they're getting it.
Because the high-level students will show
Yes.
the more correct version,
Yeah.
is that they will demonstrate that to mind map or something like that.
Man gal tą Vyganto mintį norėjau pratesti, mes vis galvom apie tas mokytojas ir vis galvom apie rezultatus. Man tokia viena mintis prie paskutinio to klausimo, kaip mes galim patį mokinį galint žinoti savo mokymosi stiprybės. Mes vis galvom, čia labai gražus buvo pavyzdys ant ten Dagnė mūsų ar kita mergaitė, mes vis galvom, aš už jį galvosiu, kaip ir parinksiu. O dar tokia viena, galbūt labai svarbi, kaip aš jį galinsiu patį būti mokymosi šeimininku. Mes nežinom, kokios jos galimybės ir galim, kaip ir jūs sakėt, nuleisti arba pakelti, bet kad jį patį padaryti savo mokymosi šeimininku. Tai galbūt čia labai ryšasi su mokymosi motivacija. Ir aš pats organizuoju savo mokymosi, gal kažkokio tai testai, kažkokios tai stiprybės jau mokymosi. Ne tai, kad jis skaito, neskaito, bet kur jo kaip besimokančias stiprybės. Atrasti tą raktą, man atrodo, labai svarbu.
And I think that's key, and I think it goes back to, somebody mentioned this, I can't remember, maybe when you shared out, having the student be aware of what their strengths and what their weaknesses are, so that when it gets time to, I have 5 minutes, they're motivated and they're not going to just sit and they're going to actually go to that activity that's going to help them. And I think that's key, like ensuring that the student is self-reflecting and knows where they are and is empowered and takes ownership of their learning in your classroom, and that you are facilitating that. That's really your role. You're allowing each student to figure out and take their own path with this end goal. So I see that people, I think every other session is done. So thank you so much for coming to our session. It was great having these discussions with you all. And if you have any questions or anything, feel free to ask us. We'll be around. But thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you.